Hey everyone, Dan here. We are in the after hours of Friday, June 18th. Today we're going to take our daily look at SoFi. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. And folks have been asking how they can help spread the word of the channel. One big way is to just share it. So if you're on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, anywhere else that you share these types of videos, these types of analyses, sharing it there with a link would be really, really helpful. And also, I sort of have an outlying question of whether or not these daily updates, I've been doing daily updates on SoFi for a few weeks now, and I'm wondering to the extent to which they are just getting kind of repetitive, or if you do feel that there's still new info being covered day to day, at least enough new info that it is worth the while. I don't mind doing the dailies. I look at it daily anyway, because I've been on this one for quite some time. But feel free to leave me a comment below and just let me know if you're finding these daily ones helpful, or if not, I'm happy to just kind of curtail them a little bit until there is either big moves or big news or some new data that comes out or something, and just kind of surgically put out videos on SoFi in those situations. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll sort of follow the lead of what you folks want. I don't mind doing that in this situation. All right, so I think it was actually a really good day for SoFi. Obviously it was a green day, but I'll sort of talk about there's the bottom line is, if you recall, way back when we were talking about this, or it feels way back, it was really just 2.5 weeks ago or so, 3 weeks ago, when the ticker symbol was going to change, and this was still IPOE, and we were just sort of anticipating the merger and the high short interest that IPOE had at that time, and the sort of perpetual attack that IPOE had been under for weeks and weeks and weeks, which is why I first took notice of it in the first place. It's kind of looking like it's starting to come back. So there was a bunch of dying down to an extent. Part of it is just the fact that the free float is now over 600 million shares. And so that's a big part of it, is, the short interest as a percentage of the float died down because there were just many more shares in the float. But also, they had come in at certain points. You can see here, for example, on the chart, clearly pointing out that there's some manipulation. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong spot. I'm half looking. Clearly manipulation below in certain areas. And so we knew that they were still hanging around. They weren't going anywhere. And there was a bunch of shorts that piled in here. But they're really, really starting to come into play now that there's this sort of sustained uptrend that's been happening for the last few days. Same way that we saw them pile in when they took their, a large number of positions here, was after this this uptick here. Now this one's a little bit more controlled, if you will. It's a little bit more methodical. It's not as chaotic of an upswing as that one. Not that I would hate another chaotic upswing, but so this is why, and we'll go over that data in a few minutes, but that's why these green days, piling, stacking on top of each other, I'm finding really, really kind of motivating. And it's just really great to see. Obviously, capped off by volume, nearly 6 million today, with an average volume of about 4.25. And so to the extent that we can continue to build the volume, that will be super, super important to seeing this play out, because, like I said, there's the idea that this short interest is now below 20%. I don't think that that's the case anymore. I think that was the case around the 28th of May when that data came out. But I think now with the free float, it's been bumped up quite a bit in share number, but the number of shares that have taken, or sorry, the number of shorts that have taken advantage of the additional shares being available in the floats, I think we're going to be right back up there as a highly shorted stock when the next set of data comes out. Sometime, hopefully in the next week. The time frames are never great because it's always a little bit old by the time you get it, but it'll give us the data as of mid-June, so probably from just a few days ago. But I've been really pleased with how this is playing out recently, and really happy to have been a part of it, way back here in the 14s. This chart's still holding up really, really well, bouncing around between this 2361 zone and the 2263 and even, the 2236. And so, I had mentioned sort of like watch out for additional topping out in this white area, this white box. I had mentioned this in yesterday's video. And as we see, it basically tried to stretch out but couldn't hold it at all, and tried to reach up again and couldn't even get through the box. And then it sort of like fell off, but then had a really good push into close. So, I think another thing to keep an eye on that could be developing here, it would be kind of in its infancy, but that's where you want to try to catch channels, is in their infancy, because then you can play them for that much longer. So it's like a double-edged sword. You want to catch them soon because you have that much longer to play them, but also it's that much more speculative when you're trying to catch it soon, because like probably more often than not, a channel won't form. It'll look like it was forming, but it actually won't. And so, you're kind of looking for something that didn't come to fruition, but that's just sort of like comes with the territory. One way to sort of like watch out for that, which I see here, is the bottom bound of this channel is being tested much, much more than the top bound of the channel. I mean, you have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe like 10 or so areas where the bottom bound of the channel is being tested here, and really just like 2, maybe 3 you could count on that one on the top end of the channel. So this isn't to say that it couldn't develop, but let's see what it does next week. But obviously, if it stays in this next week and continues to push up, that'll put it well over that 2506 support zone that I've been kind of longing for quite some time. That's been my my sort of like hill to die on. That's just what my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, however you want to look at it, my panacea. That's the one that I've been looking for. Building support at 2506. I think there's so much potential that comes after that, not only from gamma squeeze, surpassing that $25 call option mark, being in the money, and exposing potentially higher than call options being underwritten, potentially leading to some gamma squeeze potential, but then also the short squeeze. We don't need to wait for the data to come out, in my opinion. I think it's going to show that it's a very heavily shorted stock by the time the data comes out. I think we'll be well over 20% again, and the time to really be taking advantage of that is now, because we see it coming in anyway, and we know that it's there, and so we, don't have to, like, why kind of fiddle around for another 2 weeks waiting for data to come and be like, oh, 2 weeks ago, it was 27% short interest and we just didn't know it. No, I think it's here. So I think now is the time to start sort of pressing back, and the more that we can run up this channel, essentially, the more pressure that's going to put on those shorts. The fee is still very high. We'll look at that in a second. And we could see even just like a slew of small squeezes as we go along. I think that's a bunch of what we saw running up here. It was not only like pre-merger hype, but I think there was, I don't know exactly, but I think something like hype, squeeze, pull back a little bit, maybe shorts coming back in after squeeze, which is also what we see happen all the time. They just turn around and take a new position after they close out, and then coming in, and then maybe hype, and then squeeze, and then taking positions again, pushing it back down, and then hype, squeeze, so I think there's been a bunch of mini squeezes along the way, and I think that there's strong potential for that again. So it doesn't mean that we need a squeeze that takes us from 26 to 52 like in a day. I think, a squeeze that gets us from 24 to 28 over the course of a couple of days, or something like that. I think, those we should be on the lookout for and be like pretty pleased with. Speaking of needing the volume to stay up, I mean, one way to sort of keep interest high or like expose this potential play as it pans out, expose this to more traders, is to share the videos. Like I was saying before, like share these videos and say, hey, you might want to look into this. There could be a bunch of potential here. And I know a bunch of folks just love the stock also. They love the company. They see a lot of long-term potential, but not really a super compelling reason why you shouldn't take advantage of both the short and the long-term advantages of some of these stocks. And this is a really unique time in trading, period, and is a really unique time additionally for SoFi. So enough with, well, let's quick look at the indicators while we're here. Why not? Still about mid-range on the RSI, a smidge over, but nothing that just sort of like pressing against that bottom bound of the channel wouldn't sort out and putting it back to mid-range. But I'd really like to see it stretching toward the upper bound of the channel, which will be pushing it over 24 on Monday, just to reiterate that this channel has formed. I mean, I guess it doesn't have to happen on Monday, but seeing it at least not fall out of the channel would be great. Like having this channel to potentially play and then seeing it press the upper bound of the channel sometime next week to at least get like a third or fourth confirmation point at the top of the channel and sort of like work a little bit more closely toward evenly splitting how many times it's tested the top and the bottom. That would be helpful to me. And on the MACD, above the baseline right now, but flattening out. So again, definitely no reason why we couldn't see a nice bullish crossover in the coming day or days. So on Monday, for example, and potentially see a nice big upswing like we saw here. That would be obviously really great. Coming from the baseline always gives you a bunch of potential run room, and we saw it really take advantage of there. The like MACD line didn't really cross over the signal line until here in any sustained way, and even then it's sort of like kind of running into each other perpetually. So I think it has a lot of signaling that it could be crossing over again soon, again giving us a lift off the bottom of the channel. Okay, now let's look at the data. So 2 days now, we've basically been at 30 on the short volume ratio. So our volume is going up, and you see this day is nearly 10 million, and then over 7 million yesterday. We saw today was over 5. I think it was nearly 6, right? And so our volume is staying high relative to the average volume in SoFi, and the shorts are just piling in with it. They're coming harder and harder and sooner. And so that short volume ratio, I'm sure you've heard me say this a million times, but short volume ratios in the 30s are really, really, really attention grabbing. That's extremely high. A lot of folks say that 20 is very high, and they're right. But in this sort of like really outsized, overextended world in which we currently live in, the numbers have just sort of ballooned. And so now 30 is kind of commonplace for some of these stocks, but just keep in mind that is incredibly overextended. We saw them coming in on the 10th and the 11th. And if we look back to those days, this was the 8th. So after this run up, they came in on the 10th. On the 10th and on the 11th. And they were able to sort of like squash the bullish momentum that had been built. And then, probably stayed in for a few days before they covered their positions, and which drove the stock price down further based on shorts just existing in the space in an outsized quantity and distorting the amount of supply that exists in the market. This is sort of further supported by the 15-minute data that we get from Interactive Brokers. So between close yesterday and open today, really just 5K in shares being borrowed came out, just with Interactive Brokers, of course. So multiply that out over however many broker dealers, and that gives you sort of a snapshot. And then they continued to take positions out as the day went on, some opening and closing, but ultimately nets about 50% down from close yesterday to close today. So they're still continuing to take out more and more positions, closing fewer and fewer positions. So I would really, really keep an eye on this in the first half of the week, next week. But of course, Monday can often set the tone for the entire week. So that'll be a super, super important day for SoFi. So again, the idea that, the short interest in SoFi as a whole is extremely high, additionally supported by the fact that there's so few shares available. Even though the float is over 600 million, the fact that there's so few shares available to borrow to sell shorts and that the fee is remaining high because the supply is so low, there's no way in my mind that this is under 20% of the float being shorted. I think there's a ton, and I can't wait till we get the data. To reiterate this from yesterday, in case you didn't get on yesterday's video, there's still a lot of questions coming out about the lockup period. Based on this information, which is from the SEC website, 33% of the locked up shares should be permitted to be sold if they want to, as long as the stock exceeds $12.50 per share for 20 trading days in a 30-day period. So that would be coming up toward the end of the month. You could just go start from June 2nd and count the trading days, skip any days that the market was closed, including the weekend, obviously, and just see what that like 20th or 21st day is. And then an additional 50% of the shares, so a total of 83% in aggregate, can be sold as long as it stays above 15, which will still, again, I think, continue to be the case next week, which sort of puts us with this deadline. So there are a bunch of shares that will be free of their lockup period, but like I said yesterday, I kind of mostly worry about that. Now, I don't know what any of these like folks who hold these locked up shares are going to do. And I think the big wild card is the folks on the IPOE side, not necessarily the folks on the SoFi side. I do wonder if the IPOE folks are going to be more apt to sell, lock in some profit. That said, I don't think that they will fully liquidate all of their shares, but it still could be a significant amount. But I'm more worried about just the perception of it, that a bunch of retail stays away, stays out of SoFi, doesn't want to buy, volume drops a bunch because folks are worried that there's going to be a lot of shares that aren't locked up anymore and that they're going to flood the markets and that the insiders are going to be selling them. So I'm more worried that it's that sort of like reactionary issue that's going to be faced rather than the reality of a ton of shares flooding the market and being sold by insiders. And again, if that happens, I still don't think it'll be a ton, but to the extent to which it does happen, I don't think it'll really come from people who are at SoFi, the company, who have shares. I think it'll be folks who had IPOE and were, had their pipe shares or, were involved in that SPAC before it had a target and before it merged and all that. I think those folks are probably more apt to put their shares into the market to some degree. But even then, that might not happen. But I do worry about the perception that folks are going to have and that they're potentially going to stay away and that could potentially bring the volume down. And with the short interest rising and the volume dying down, that could really have a detrimental effect on the stock price and push it down. But I think that sort of like spreading the word about this, sort of explaining why the end of the lockup period may not have any true impact other than how people perceive it and then react or overreact to it, might help sort of like educate people in a different way, or at least give them a different perspective to consider while they're trying to make their own decisions. And sharing these videos and that share the data, that show the chart analysis, that show the potential here. I think those things, I think we need sort of like continuously build additional interest from folks who aren't playing SoFi, that might want to be able to come in. Okay, it's been a long week. I'm tired. I'm sure you all are too. I appreciate you watching these videos. Again, please let me know if you want these SoFi videos to continue daily, or if you want them to just sort of be on days when some like important thing happens. I'm game for either. I just don't want to be beating people over the head with things that they don't necessarily want. All right, well, have a great weekend. I'm ready for an exciting week tomorrow, and I will see you in the next video.